folks. All right, so we'll do the usual, right? We're going to wait a little bit, let the notifications go out, all that usual stuff. Let people file in before I go on to something. But I hope, maybe that's more appropriate. I hope you'll appreciate my topic today. It was actually spawned by a comment, so we'll get into that in a sec. For the folks here early in chat, several of you got stuff to do, gonna watch the restream or lurking. Maria Z specifically is setting up a shrimp tank. Said, already left a like. Did you? Better YouTuber than me. Already. Because you guys know, I basically, unless someone else says something, I don't pay attention. Oh, man. So let's talk some short recent events, and then we'll get into the topic, right? We'll take a couple minutes. The Greater Seattle Aquarium Society had a picnic on Saturday. I didn't get to go. And Corey from Aquarium Co-op actually showed up, which is kind of surprising because I haven't seen him at the club picnic in a couple of years, or at least the last couple of years that it had been run. Granted, last year there was no picnic because human malware is the thing. But yeah, so kind of shucky darns there because it was apparently the largest picnic the club has ever had. As far because most of the time it's a really small affair, right? You don't have people who've been stuck in their houses for the last year, unable to do anything, and unable to talk with fish nerds. Yeah, but I missed that because of work. And there was some impromptu meeting apparently at the co-op today, where Zenzo was in town. I missed that because of work. It's all right. That's part of my life. But we've got a few moments of random stuff. By the way, today's hat, I'm getting an emote, by the way, for folks. I've got a list of stuff I need to go get in queue with an artist because he has a massive queue. But this, for those who don't know, this is the Portland Mavericks, which is a team that doesn't exist anymore. But there's a phenomenal documentary on Netflix called The Battered Bastards of Baseball. And for those of you who might not know, Kurt Russell, the actor, used to play minor league ball for the Mavericks, and he's featured quite prevalently in that little documentary. It's very interesting because his dad, Bing Russell, who has some fame, if you were really into Westerns, you'd know who he is. He was in Bonanza for a long time, and a million Western films. He had small bit roles. He owned the team. But also, up until, I think it was injury for Kurt Russell that stopped him from playing baseball, he had the potential to play pro ball and ended up as an actor instead. And I think the world's better for that because several amazing films, my personal favorite being Big Trouble in Little China, exist because that man is an actor. So, yeah. A little history lesson behind the hat today. Let's dive in on topic. I'm sure somebody's going to be like, this has to be really blown out of proportion. My topic is most fish tubers hate this, but I love it. And this was spawned by a comment. So, I talked, when I was doing a bunch of the Filtration 101 videos, and I talked about anoxic and anaerobic bacteria and those methods of filtration. It's really common when you get things like that or other topics. You inherently, as a creator, are going to get some person who, whether they're intentional or they've been doing some amount of research, wants to be hyper contrarian, the "no, you're wrong" person in the comments. Now, me personally, I love these people. And it's similar where if when you get people that say some potentially hurtful things in chat, I think you guys have seen it. For the most part, we don't get those anymore. But you get people who try to say something terrible about somebody. If you had if you had some gap in your tooth or something, or you had a broken tooth, they say something hurtful about it, right? Just because all they want to do is get a rise out of you. I like those people because it gives me an opportunity to do two things. Now, in the case of people being inflammatory, it gives me an opportunity to remind myself that I'm in a much happier place than they are. Because I see that, I ignore that entirely. Because you can't possibly make me feel bad when I know that the numbers are, if 60 people are in chat, one of them is being a jerk. The other 59 are great people. And they're here, they're having fun, they're making it interactive so that I can have fun, right? This is something I love very much, being able to babble aquatics. On YouTube, of all things. It combines a lot of things in my life. Now, comments where you're being contrarian get a little different. You'll get those people who, of course, are like... I get it on, like, all sorts of stuff. A great example would be, like, on the Sun, that big bucket of junk. People are like, oh, I've got it. It's absolutely perfect. Blah, 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 blah. I don't even delete a lot of those comments. because I want them to be there, right? And let me explain. Most recently was a guy really digging in on anoxic and anaerobic bacteria. I wrote several comments, replied to a bunch of other people's comments. Guy was busy. He had a message to get out. But let me explain why I love this kind of stuff. Because one, it gives me an opportunity to see something from the other person's side, especially when they give me like a website that they've done their research on. Research. Now, I'll give you this example because this came directly from a comment. It was actually responding to someone else's comment, but I saw it and I was sitting there reading it, and I did a little research in the morning, the day after the comment, and I'm looking at this person's website, and they're talking about how lots of YouTubers claim this and that, and okay, all right. And this person mentions themselves specifically as a degreed chemist, always in third person, very anonymous, never says who their name is. By the way, the author, they refer to themselves as the author very frequently, and that they have, it's like 40-something patents. Those are the two things to establish their credibility, right? Now, I come from a world when I was in high school and middle school, I did a lot of debate. And I did, more importantly, this is how nerdy I am, I did science debate. And so, somebody already knows who this is. It's aquariumscience.org. I'm not afraid. So here's the thing. If you were a scientist of some level of note, and you had 40-something patents that were good patents, because I can get a patent on dang near anything, and it's a junk patent. There are a lot of people who are out there and get junk patents purely for the purpose of being litigious to sue other people to make their living so they don't have to work. Right? But if you were, say, Gary Lang, we're talking about a person who is in the field of science for a living, is an aquarist, has the scientific description of several fish to his credit, you put that information out there. Scientists of any note are not afraid to show, here's my credentials, here's who I am, here is what I've done, this is why you should pay attention to what I have to say. But when you're a degreed chemist with random patents, okay. Now, I'm not going to immediately dismiss because of that. I'm a very analytical thinker. I love blowing holes in people's arguments. That was literally my job on my debate teams for science. Like, yeah, science debate. How freaking nerdy, right? As a kid, my whole role on my team was to point out all of the holes in the arguments of the opposing team. This makes sense as to why I work in the field of test. I am really good at breaking things, finding holes in the system, finding exploits. This is what I'm very good at. It's just the way my brain clicks. So I read the rest of it. Okay? Makes lots of definitions and claims. But never does he directly say, here's my source cited with a link to whatever scientific paper, research study, what have you, proves their point. If you are a person who is a degreed chemist, who had many patents, wrote many scientific papers, you would understand at the most basic level how to back up your theory, because it is all theory, with evidence. Now this, let me get into why I like this kind of stuff, right? I get to go into like the recesses of some person's theorem, research, experiments, what have you. Claims to have lots of experiments, never shows a journalistic log, never shows pictures to prove the data, nothing. Nothing. Okay. So my analytical brain kicks into high gear. Really goes crazy, right? And I dive in and I'm looking at all this stuff. So I'm poking little holes and looking at this because my goal is I actually want this person to prove someone wrong. But there's no evidence. Because if I can increase my scientific understanding of something, I like it. I'm into that all the time. I think that's one of the things that's maybe a little different about me is that I'm very happy to talk about and talk to someone who has a contrarian opinion as long as you can back it up with fact. I like that kind of conversation. Even if in the end I disagree with you, I'm going to agree to disagree. In the sense that I want to have that back and forth conversation because it might open up a different train of thought in my mind. It might open up a different concept of how I approach something, whatever it may be. A lot of people hate this stuff because they just want to run away from it, right? Because it's a minefield of like going back and forth the comments, and often it leads to people getting the worst part of humanity, just being jerks, right? But for me, I'm sitting there going like, I want to learn, but if you don't give me the tools to prove your theorem, how can I take you with any degree of seriousness? Now, I haven't responded to this comment. I want to be really clear. I will eventually. I just have to find the proper time. Because part of it is I want to go to the person that's like, hey, how come there's no citing of sources, there's no logs, there's no nothing. Nothing. At least when I do an experiment video, I show you guys the data. I show you physical proof you can see, right? And I haven't even done it to like the maximum scientific level that I want to do. But I could show you like a log of where I'm logging all my data. Basic level stuff. None of that's present. It's like, now why do I like this stuff? Because like, you know, you're probably like, okay, Bentley, why are you going on to this rant about some crackpot who's grumpy and really wants to like just shake his fist at the world? I think it's really, really important for us as a whole, people as a whole, to be skeptical. What I mean is, if somebody tells you, I'm an expert in this, but doesn't ever back it up with some obvious thing. Like if they say, I'm an expert in ichthyology, and you go, great, where's your degree from? Oh, don't worry, I've got a degree. Yeah, where's it from? Yeah, I got a degree. I graduated with honors. We should instantly be skeptical of that kind of person. Similar on YouTube, right? You got some chucklehead in Seattle who it works as a tester testing products. You should be skeptical immediately until that person proves to you that what they say is true. And that could just be that you see their process. It could be that you see a number of consistencies in things. You see that somebody is, in the case of like YouTube, very frequently, somebody's willing to be critical. It isn't always like glowingly positive about things. Because if they're always glowingly positive about something and they were provided that item or paid for that by that company, obviously something's wrong, right? Obviously we're shading something away or we're being untruthful. So it's important for us on the audience side to be skeptical of what we're told. If somebody says, I make the best X, or this is the best X, prove it. That's the first thing that should come to our minds is prove it. So that's the end. Part of this is just like, I love this kind of stuff. I'm a skeptic by nature. I like seeing things from the other side, and then immediately my like hyper analytical brain is like, find everything they've done wrong. And maybe that's the deep down like jerk of me that forged in the fires of like gamer trolls, but I try to form my arguments when I talk to people like that in a very respectful way, right? It's not like, no, you're wrong, you jerk. It's more of like, hey, I'm interested to learn more about this kind of stuff, but, you know, my problem is this person doesn't cite any sources, any scientific studies, doesn't show me their data logs from their experiments, so it's hard to take what they're saying at face value as being the truth when I don't have the necessary backup to prove what they're saying. Right, it's like, it's a gentle way to finesse it. Now most people take that like, it's like blah 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 blah, but whatever. Just like I'm similarly skeptical about certain people who I may like on YouTube because it's hard for me to see the data that proves their theory. And that's the part of me that's like a tester by nature. I want data. Give me data. Or give me something to prove it in my hands. So that's my little short rant. Basically, the end thing here is like, guys, be skeptical. Whether it's me, whether it's your favorite YouTuber, whoever it may be skeptical of things. Question stuff, because it helps us to make sure that any claim is fully factual. If we question it immediately, and it doesn't have to be like just never believe anyone. That's not what I'm saying. But more like if somebody makes a very lambastic claim in the sense of like, this is the best filter ever. Not my favorite filter. That's different. A favorite is an opinion. The best ever. That's trying to state fact, right? And for some people, like, their vernacular is a little different. But we want to be skeptical when we hear this is the best ever versus like, this is my favorite thing and here's why. There's an important difference in the messaging. And it's important for us to be skeptical and make sure that it's not because of something that's not based on experience, experimentation, what have you. In aquariums, for the most part, it's experience, right? It's just us like, I got a thing, I tried the thing, I like the thing more than the other thing I used to have. whether it's a filter, a heater, a substrate, a light, a manufacturer of tanks, whatever it may have, fertilizer, whatever it may be, right? It's one of those things where I would caution those things. And like, so here's an example. Metcow was talking in chat, and there's a few other examples I want to get to, but it's like, YouTubers do product reviews on sponge filters and say this sponge filter is better than this one, but none of them have shown proof of the amount of beneficial bacteria that grows on each one. Great example, right? I have a goal to do some like serious long-term stuff eventually, but it requires me to have my garage. I need the space. Because I really want to do a lot of side-by-side testing so you can actually see, like, let's compare medias in a filter. If everybody has the same filter and the only difference is what media is in it, we can test biocapacity by using, like, an ammonia additive or what have you, right? Not without having to put, like, live fish in there. We can do all sorts of stuff. Now, granted, in most cases, we're never creating so much bioload that we're ever really going to push the boundaries of what several of the larger filters can handle, right? Yeah, you have more biocapacity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the colony will ever be the size to handle this like massive bioload theoretical concept that's in life, right? There's some other interesting stuff there, but that's a conversation for another time. I had a couple of cool comments. Some of them just made me laugh. Paul Soltero, I'm a retired intermodal transportation engineer with side gigs in horticulture, agriculture, and culinary arts. So you better listen to what I say. He knows everything, clearly. Joe Davis, what was the most contradictory point raised by said entity? The biggest one was just that, like, it's impossible for... Basically, it was impossible for a biocenosis basket of the ones that I glanced over. I didn't read everything on this person's site. It was impossible for it to work the way it was claimed. There's a lot of talk about, like, how ion charges work and XYZ and how there's no special qualities of what's being used to do this and that. And it's kind of like, all right, point me to the science, and never got pointed to the science. So what do you do? Planet Tanks, as a master's student and soon to be PhD student. Wow, you're busy. I completely understand where you're coming from. Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, you need that data. It's so important. Jimbo, small comment, but not on topic. Do you have a Discord server? Yes. It's for members. I keep it small on purpose because I want it to be a small, kind of tight-knit community. It's for anybody at the Pseudomagil or higher member level. But basically, once you're a member once, you get access to the Discord, you're there forever. Because I don't maintain it so hard that, like, you're not currently an active member, I kick you out. No. It's just one of those things where, like, if you become a member for a little bit, it's my way to say thanks. We had some interesting conversations over last weekend. There was a lot of people talking back and forth. I asked a philosophical question of some of the members, and for those of you, if you're listening and you responded, just thank you. Maybe one day we'll talk about what spawned that philosophical question, but I appreciated seeing people's responses. And there's some people apparently is like the particular one, and there's a lot of other comments I've had that aren't just this one particular person. I'm just using this as the most recent example, right? The goal here is, like, if you're not being given fact or some kind of data to prove something, be skeptical right away. Just be skeptical. Now, if it's somebody that you inherently have trusted because they've proven over time to be straightforward and honest with you, doesn't mean you have to be skeptical at all times, right? But yeah. One of those things. There's one more I want to go. There's one person who's mentioning, like, in this particular case, that the biggest problem they have is the site is the way that the experiments are conducted. Experiments being in quotation marks. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting into. It's just the data's not there to prove a lot of things, and that's where I start questioning things. And Jacob, the barber, What's the mitochondria? You didn't even like force me to answer. You answered it for it. What's the powerhouse cell, man? It's the power plant, baby. It's all that. Kelly Foreman, is the Discord on your Patreon? Yes, it should be, but I'll re-put a post on Patreon because it's been a while. It's kind of a buried post because it's from when I first put it together. I have to, realistically, I should probably like kill my Patreon, but it's there for some reason. I don't know. Some people like it over like YouTube memberships. I think if Corey figures out how to do YouTube membership API and somehow makes that like open to other people, I'd be really interested to figure out how to use that API for certain things. Because I would love to be able to just be like, are you a member? You can join the horticulture program for free. You know, it's one of those things where like I would love to do that as opposed to having to charge for it, but I don't know how to do that correctly. Yeah, and then Discord stuff, we could probably talk in depth about that, but yeah, for as far as photos are concerned, there's a limit to the size it can be, so you have to like chop them down a bunch to make them fit without it getting super angry. Son of a quack. I just joined the stream and the first thing I hear is, what is the mitochondria? Oh, man. Okay, so we'll get into full questions. So that being said, like at Bentley Pasco is the easiest way for me to see things. There's all that kind of nonsense. But yeah. If you have a question, shoot it in chat. We'll get to it. Shout out to Baron Tropicals, who's in chat. This guy's actually like the reason I made my very first fish video. So he's saying, look at Mr. Bentley all grown up. Yeah, technically I'm Mr. Pasco. Although Mr. Pasco's my dad. And even then my dad didn't really go by that. But yeah, man, it's been a wild ride. Since I just remember watching a lot of, especially your content early on when I was doing like tiny, terrible videos with my old horrid cell phone. Kind of wild that like one contest you did and a video I did to enter that contest eventually led down the path of me dedicating a lot of time to aquatics and more importantly the YouTube side of aquatics. Crazy stuff, right? So Mr. Pasco is your grandfather. Well, Mr. Pasco was my grandfather until he passed away, but yes, that would be my grandfather was in the military and is in a military national cemetery. Actually, not too terribly far from my house now, where I live. But yeah. All right. So I saw this. Tom Wing, do you recommend Flourish XL to deal with blackbeard algae? So it's one of the easiest ways to deal with blackbeard is by spot using Flourish XL, not necessarily trying to treat the whole tank. And the way that I found this easiest to do is if you can get a small syringe. You could also do it with a pipette, but a syringe tends to be a little more controllable with the plunger. And just go in and spray it directly, even underwater, onto the blackbeard algae. And you have to do this in small bits. It's a slow process. It really accelerates the process of killing it off. Now, there's also a full tank method, often called the 1-2 punch on planettank.net, of using hydrogen peroxide at a safe level that will kill the algae but not hurt your fish and shrimp. But that requires being very, very, very exact. And a lot of people like to do it the fast and loose way and not follow things to a T. And if you don't follow a thing to a T, you actually do risk your fish and some of your plants. So it depends on like how meticulous you are as a person. If you're ultra meticulous, the like hydrogen peroxide method is so cheap. You can go to a dollar store, get yourself a 3% solution hydrogen peroxide, which is the standard one, for like $1. At a grocery store, it's maybe $2. And you can use part of that to treat an entire tank and get it done. But if you are a little worried about like not being exact and perfect, yeah, something like Flourish Excel, Easy Carbon, any of the liquid carbon products that contain glutaraldehyde are really good at dealing with blackbeard algae. They're also good at dealing with staghorn algae. But yeah, it's all about how meticulous you want to be. If you're willing to take more time and be a little more fast and loose, go with the liquid carbon. If you're like super meticulous, you know how to do you want to do all the math and conversions and this, and you have some of the equipment required because you need really good flow rate to do this, you could do the peroxide method. And like Rogue Aquariums, my buddy Darren here is mentioning, like, yeah, it can be at small increments. It can be added very safe. It's very effective. It's used in, I think it's used in salt too for some cases. And the big thing is like hydrogen peroxide will naturally break down in the water and turn to just oxygen and just hydrogen, which becomes safe. So it very quickly becomes safe inside your tank, but it's a matter of doing it absolutely correct. Or if you overdose, it becomes very risky very fast. That's the scary part. Like you can burn fish gills, and you can burn some of the leafage of a plant, all kinds of stuff, because you'll oxidize it too much, right? That's what peroxide is. It's oxidizer. Joe Davis, philosophical question: how many fish could a fish room if a fish room could room fish? I would argue that a fish room could room as many fish as the aquarist was willing to room within each tank in the room. So much as their maintenance can handle the level of fish roomed in the room. I'm such a dummy. All right. Joe Davis, there's a way, going back to our conversation, there's a way of challenging someone without persecuting them. It takes a lot of humbleness and empathy. Yes, most certainly. And a lot of that is just like, a lot of people, especially in text, can struggle to communicate very cleanly and respectfully with other people. And it's really easy for us as humans to read something and immediately take it in the negative, take it as an attack, and not necessarily read it in a way where somebody's just trying to be straightforward and ask a question, or straightforward and go like, hey, here's my point. I'm interested in what you have to say, but here's the problem with the source you're citing, right? It's really hard to not read that as like, I'm interested in what you have to say, very like, I'm dismissing you, but here's the problem with what you've got. Just like smacking down your evidence, right? So it's tough. It's really tough, especially in text, on like a comment or an email. It can be very tough if you don't know that person and understand like how they would communicate in person. Where in person, you have body language, you have vocal tone, you have all those things to tell you like this person's being sincere versus this person's just being a jackass, right? I'm like going in reverse on on chat tonight because I realize I'm like catching stuff down low, but it's like I need to go back up and get some stuff. Harry Nolan, have you ever used Safety Zorb as a substrate for a planted tank? Not yet. My friend Jason at Redfish Bluefish has, and we've had some very interesting conversations about his results. I've got the Horticulture Awards chairperson for my club, so the person who runs the plant program for the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society and has for many, many years. He's used Safety Zorb in many of his tanks and had phenomenal results. So you definitely can do it. Recently set up a 10-gallon test tank with it and Seachem root tabs. So far it's doing really well. Bit of staghorn though. Sure, and the staghorn might not be directly related. I've seen a lot of people getting staghorn lately. It's been like an outbreak more commonly of staghorn recently for folks. Which our first video in a series very soon might help with that, on how to handle staghorn algae. But that's spoilers for you guys who are here in chat. But the one thing I would say is that like the capacity to absorb things in Safety Zorb is pretty crazy. So hopefully you gave it plenty of charging time, so that it's not just like constantly stripping your water, because that could make the plants struggle to actually fight the staghorn algae off when it comes to what nutrients are in the water. Because algae, right? Algae are single cell organisms, are extremely simple compared to plants. They need really very little to capitalize and take off compared to plants, which are much more complex organisms. They need a specific amount of things in this more balance, that kind of triangle of power, right? That I've talked about several times, in order to thrive. Whereas algae kind of just needs one thing and they can go hog wild on you, which sucks, but you can get it under control. I like it because I like the way it looks. My big thing about Safety Zorb, compared to a lot of the other like DIY substrates or cheaper substrates, like even dirt, it just looks good. It just looks good. I love the look of Safety Zorb, and when I do my garage, there's going to be a couple tanks specifically done in Safety Zorb on purpose, and we'll do big tutorials with everything and all the usuals, right? Don't worry, that stuff will come when I can get to it. My problem really is, like, I only have so much capacity in my house currently until I have a dedicated fish environment, if you will. This is as psychotic as that sounds. Slack and crack. I almost said track because my brain just like read it that way. And then my voice nearly cracked. So wonderful, right? I ordered some of your blue Hawaiians from Redfish Bluefish. Awesome. Can't wait till they ship out. Yeah, I'm actually surprised the last batch has like stayed in stock a lot longer than I kind of expected. And maybe that's just because I took a lot of fish. We like conservatively called it 35 pairs, but I'm pretty sure it was like 50 to 60 pairs. So plus a bunch of like fry and some random other stuff that just ended up in the net, and it was just like, I don't care, they go to your shop free and things will happen. But I love the opportunity to get those fish out to people, because I can't ship, but Jason can, and if I get to help a local business by letting him sell my fish at a reasonable price for folks, and then also get those out to hobbyists who've been waiting, makes me really thrilled, man. I want that line to just keep rolling, because it's such a pretty fish, and especially because a lot of things about that fish you can't capture on camera, you can't see it in a video, you have to see it in person, especially if you get a little bit of sunlight on them. Ooh, whew, they are magical. They are magical, and that's why I love them so much. It's one of those things that like you can only truly appreciate in person, so it makes keeping them even better. Tom H, what's up, Tom? Java moss versus Christmas moss? Question mark. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to take that. Am I supposed to compare and contrast? Am I supposed to just gut check my favorite one of the two? Am I supposed to give it an aquascaping potential versus a breeding tank potential? I'll tell you what, I like each in different scenarios. I like Java moss in more bare bottom tanks designed for breeding, especially for young fry. If you've ever watched some of the videos where Corey's in Dean's fish room, you'll notice he puts little bits of Java moss in his fry trays all the time. And part of that is to help culture a lot of that microorganism food, right? Our biofilms and stuff like that. It gives it surface area for those things to go on, while also being a plant that does a few things and takes care of a little bit of waste and gives them some hiding space, all that kind of jazz. But it's really good for baby fry. I like Christmas moss when it comes to trying to be more decorative. I think if you're trying to like do even like a low tier aquascape, aka what I do, where you just kind of put some plants in some places and a little bit of hardscape, and you're not like going too crazy, or you're going real crazy, that's where I like Christmas moss. Just the look of it's a little more pretty. Like Java moss, when it's super healthy, can still look okay, but it's not as pretty as Christmas moss when Christmas moss is really healthy and happy, right? So that's where I like the two of them differently. The other one I like right now, I have some of this. I have to look it up, because every time I try to remember it, I pronounce it wrong, because it's a more complicated name than my brain ever wants to remember. But I've been growing it out in a tank. It's like hiding in a corner. There it is. Calicostella probactiana. Complicated name, right? But it's this cool moss that has like a really long, almost feather look to it, and it grows really well in clumps as well. So it has this kind of like hanging, almost willowy feather look to it. It's just very pretty moss. It's hard to find good pictures of it. It's like one of those things where like you need to see it up close. I should probably just take a like super good picture with my camera of my particular moss so that I can show why I like it so much at one point. There you go. There's my Java moss versus Christmas moss. There's my opinion. Concept? Idea? I don't know. Whatever it is. Connor, I just bought a 4-foot by 14 by 14 38-gallon tank. That's interesting dimensions. I like that 14 by 14. It's not too big. It's just slightly smaller than a 40 breeder. That's interesting. Want to stock it with rainbows. We spoke about rads at a 20 long. I'm interested to see the biggest rainbow nerd stocking option. Biggest nerd option. Ooh. So it depends on whether your goal is rarity and you're that level of nerd, or whether you want something that's got an interesting story. So let me tell you that my two options here. Maybe three. If you want like the hyper rare, the newest kid on the block, that's the Melanitania species Tawa, right? And I think I've shown that. Let me see if I still got the photo line around over here. Nope. I'm pretty sure, though, I have it hidden away. Oh, do I really not? Womp womp. I thought I had this, a photo of this fish, like, hidden away somewhere so I could use it. That would have been smart. Alright, I'll stop looking. That's the one that has kind of a turquoise body, but has that bright red tail and that white belly, and they're a small dwarf fish. They're starting to get out there now. Hoon Aquatics, who's another YouTuber, does a lot of Instagram stuff. He actually like sells mops of their eggs, if I remember correctly, so you can actually raise your own, which I think is really cool. Now, if you want the fish that has the story, there's technically two options here. I'm partial to the running river rainbow fish. Obviously, I call them the crown jewel of my fish room. I like things with a story, and I'm weird. So keep that in mind, right? But there's something that a small group of scientists on very little money saved from extinction because someone or somehow a different rainbow got into their native habitat and they started hybridizing. And the small group of scientists, who includes like Peter Unmack, which is like probably the foremost rainbow fish oriented scientists in Australia, if not the world right now. Guy's just absolute legend. And a real peach of a human being, too. Hit their group at the University of Canberra, found non-hybridized subjects, brought them into a facility, bred out a bunch of them, and then found two new co-locations where no other rainbow fish existed. They were further upstream so that stuff couldn't come downstream and hybridize with them. But if they went downstream, whatever, they'd have to go down some waterfalls, so little unlikely, but and they saved this fish basically from going extinct. And it's the running river rainbow is beautiful. Mine, now that they're in the running river tank, as I've been calling it, where I fully planted it and all that, and you can see their color. Man, when I go and feed them every morning, well, almost every morning, I give them some fasting breaks, let's be fair, but I sit and I stare at them because the males have golds and reds and black striping, little teeny hints of green if you're looking at it, and just they're beautiful, absolutely beautiful fish. Now, the other fish that's in the same boat is the Malanda gold, and this is it's actually like the fish that I have in here, although mine are getting old and passing away. And I only had males. I didn't have any females. They were the last ones that Dean had. He really struggled with them. And he gave me basically like 4 or 5 males. And you know, they're a dwarf fish. They don't live quite as long. They only live about 5 years, but they have this beautiful like dark red color to them. And they have a much different body shape. There's like kind of interesting angles in their heads that aren't very common in rainbow fish, and they're very similar. That's the current project that the Rainbow Conservation Fund and that whole team is working on to save this species now. And their specific one that I had was from Wallace Road. They're a little harder to get, but there are some people that have them on like Aquabid and stuff. Those are the fish that have stories, and I like a fish with a story. If I have an interesting story about a fish, I tend to have a little more affinity to them, because like you guys know that when I try to do videos, I do interviews with people, I'm trying to tell stories. I'm not necessarily trying to be like, what's your business? What do you do? It's like, but why do you do it? What's the story behind it? Those are the things that really perk my attention and get me interested in things. And part of that's because I did radio for a long time. I'm a D&D nerd. Like, I love storytelling. That's something that I'm very into. Finding the story and the history behind things is extremely interesting to me. That's like half of my listening is like random history about things. The other stuff is basically fish videos. It's like stuff that I have on in the background audio while I'm at work. 9 times out of 10, it's probably like learning the history of something, or like learning technical details about something, because I'm such a friggin' nerd. The final one, because I think they school so well, and they would do well in a 20 long too. They're a little bit bigger than a rad, but not by much. Most of it's their taller body height. They're not as torpedo shaped as rads are, and that would just be the pygmy rainbow, Corydora. Hide myself in shame. Melanitania pygmaea. I was about to say Corydora pygmaeus, because I was looking at pygmy cories for as an option for my brother-in-law's tank. Anyway, Melanitania pygmaea, they have this like cool gunmetalish gray color that they get in when the males are courting, and they have a nice blue-gray color to them naturally. They school really, really well. They don't get super big, so you can get a good number of them in a tank, especially something that's like that near 40-gallon range. They don't need as much room as a lot of other fish. Like, they do very well in a 20 long. They're one of the other species I like in 20 longs. And they're a little easier to obtain, so if you're not going to go crazy and be like, how do I track down this random fish that Bentley talked about that only like 3 people in the country have, or some nonsense like that. They're a little easier to get a hold of, so that makes it a little more likely to pull off if you can't find like the running river rainbow reasonably, although there's a lot of the rainbow nerds that have been breeding them actively, which is great. It's something I need to do, but I need space, blah blah, the usual complaints from Bentley, right? I don't have enough space. Where I have to mock myself, because otherwise I get really sad that I actually don't have space. That's how I roll, man. Yeah, those are the things I would go with. Those are kind of some nerd options. Some are a little ultra nerdy. Some are a little medium nerdy. Oh man, now I know I've been talking too much. I'm way behind on chat. Self, I know you've been working your brains too much. Are you still planning on making mineralized soil? Yep. That's on my list. I actually got on a suggestion, I got something to help facilitate that long term. But I basically have to have another tank in order to do it. That's one of those things, right? But yeah. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything super important. And if for some reason I miss your question, guys, feel free to repost it. And if for some reason I don't get to you, bentley.pasco@gmail.com is my email. Feel free to email me. I'm actually reasonably caught up with email right now, so I think I've only got like one more I have to respond to right now. Adam. How long of a CO2 line can I run from my source before it's no longer efficient? Example would be like have 2 tanks opposite side of the room. The longest CO2 line I've run and still had no issues, and a lot of this depends on the type of line you use and the pressure that you're running your PSI that you're running your gas at. But I think the longest I ran was like 8 foot, and it was fine. If you use the CO2 proof tubing, the stuff that's a little stiffer, whether you get that from like Greenleaf Aquariums or whatever, to buy it in longer lengths than like the prepackaged 8 or 6 or 10 foot, you can go a little longer, and you crank your PSI on your regulator up some, and it will happen. It just takes a lot longer to fill that entire line and start getting into your aquarium. Is really all it comes down to. I don't know if there's like a true maximum based on length, but I would say if it's within 10 feet, you're probably okay. Just understand that you probably need to be running at like 35 PSI in your regulator, maybe even 40, although I would caution you to not push that hard right away. I would start at like that 30 to 35 range with good CO2 proof tubing and work from there. And make sure that line has some slack. Don't have it like really tight. Have slack. Or very, very carefully route things. Like that's the other option. Bob Purcell. I have a planted 20 high tank with an established colony of endlers. I'd like to add coolie loaches. Nice. And cherry shrimp. Also nice. Will the shrimp breed and grow out with the coolies and endlers? Should. So here's where this gets a little interesting. Coolies are super, super gentle fish in the grand scheme of things. It's the potential of the endlers, and mostly the females, because they have the big body size and bigger mouths, going after the baby shrimp. So what you need is lots of hiding places, whether this is very dense plant life or rock piles. Now, the rock piles can naturally be places for the coolies to hide as well. So there's some give and take here. But I would say you should be able to do something. The biggest thing is starting with a reasonable colony of cherry shrimp to begin with. Don't put in just like 6 cherry shrimp and expect it to work, especially if you already have an established colony of endlers. You might need to put in 20 or 30 to start getting the colony growing and hitting that critical mass. The other thing is keep in mind that shrimp don't necessarily like going super hot, at least cherry shrimp. So make sure that your temperature is not, if you're pushing like 80 temperature, you actually have a risk of having those shrimp live too short a life to get the colony up to really, really sustainable numbers. But if you're at like 74, 72, you're fine. Just keep those couple things in mind. I like endlers and cherry shrimp. I've done that in the past. It's like the only time I had cherries be reasonably successful and had the colony grow to a reasonable size. And then I tore that tank down, moved my cherry shrimp somewhere else, and I haven't done well with shrimp ever since. I'm not meant to keep shrimp is what I swear it happens to be. But yeah, and coolies. I like coolies with endlers. That's a cool little, you got some wiggles in there to go with the endlers. I like it. All right, let's see here. Joe Davis, you asked me to keep you updated on the new management at my local fish store. Awesome. I like updates. Recently had a fish die from there, and they have a 1-day warranty. Oof. 1 day? I mean, I know plenty of places that don't necessarily have a warranty or a guarantee, but like the ones that do, it's typically like 2 weeks. And I can understand not necessarily like backing every fish you bring in, like depending on how they do things, but 1 day seems a little tight. That seems like you're just like, hey, unless your tank's so bad it immediately dies, it's your fault. And even then, it was your fault in the first place, and we're not helping you. Little unfortunate. You would hope that like maybe you could go in and talk to them very calmly, like, hey, I've seen it very common that like a lot of stores in other places typically do 7 days or 14 days or 10 business days, however you want to phrase it, but 2 weeks or a week, right? Is there any way we can maybe like especially for somebody who like I want to support your store, but like one day if I lose a fish, 2 days, kind of sucks that I only have one day. Or maybe like, hey, I work, I couldn't get in the very next day. Am I still out of fish? You know, things like that. It's interesting questions you could bring to them, just like from a perspective of like, hey, ask yourself the question: do I want to be known for good customer service, or am I just here to make a buck? And sometimes you almost have to. You don't want to necessarily phrase it that way. Hopefully, you have some rapport with them, but it's one of those things where like sometimes you almost have to phrase it that way. It's like, is your whole goal just to make a buck, or is your goal to like further the hobby and be a good steward of the community? Because if so, then it's a little different, right? You want customer service. Any retail wants good customer service, and 1 day warranty is a little rough, But live animals are a crazy thing too, so I guess I can understand, but I would never be happy with that as a customer. That would really suck. To be fair though, anytime I've lost fish, other than the one time I tried to do it when I originally got the Blue Hawaiian Moscows, I have always assumed it was my fault and never contacted the person I bought them from. That's not true. There's one case where I got something. That's just because it was an obvious disease on a fish, and it was really clear. Like I went back, I didn't even ask for a refund or anything. It was just like, hey, you might want to like really look at your tanks and make sure. And he was like, oh, I have a sterilizer on it. It's like, yeah, it's great. That doesn't stop Calamanus worms in a fish. That's not what a UV sterilizer does. But that guy's shop no longer exists, so kind of tells you something, right? New Mexico Aquatics. Little Bobby, good to see you, buddy. Someone gifted me a specimen of Cryptocorine Rosen Maiden. That is a great plant. So that's a Nurii species. Do I have any experience with this plant? Yes, I have several of them flowering currently in the running river tank. Tips. Okay. So Nurii, and which Rosen Maiden is a type of Nurii, is a crypt that normally likes to lay flat. So instead of growing up tall, it spreads out flat like a carpeting plant, which is what makes it really cool. It really appreciates lower amounts of light when it comes to high amounts of propagation. So if you looked at that PAR test, that field of crypts, Rosen Maiden's mixed in there. And I can tell them by eye, just because you can look at the striping on the leaf patterns and know regular Nurii versus Rosen Maiden. Versus, there's also another one that I have there's another Nurii called Pahang Mutated, but that grows very differently, so that makes it super easy. But basically, if you look at some of those CO2 tests, or those PAR tests, you'll know that like the most I was giving them with the Aqua Sky is like 40 something PAR, right? They're not getting a ton of light. If you blast too much light at them, they actually are very unhappy. So if you're trying to do it well, shade it a little bit if you're in bright light, but otherwise bring your light down a little bit, dim it some. They really appreciate warmer light tones, so getting those oranges, those reds, stuff like that, if you can adjust your levels. Other than that, it's just a decent substrate that gives good minerals at the roots. You can supplement with root tabs to help make this easier, and a little bit of CO2 goes a long way with that plant. Not necessarily required, but if you want to get it propagating very fast and getting that really good color, that pinky kind of reddish color that Rosen Maiden can get, you really do need a small amount of CO2. But I'm talking like a 40 breeder with 2 bubbles a second is enough. You don't need a lot. Very, very small amount. It does great. Hope that helps. Fishaholic. Water Sprite Wisteria nubius going brown. What would be the cause? So typically, we have to look at a couple things, because it could be algae forming on the surface, but most likely if the leaves are going brown, that means they're dying, and you have one of two things going on. Either A, it's immersed grown and it's not converting very well, or the old growth is dying off, waiting for new growth to come in. Now, if it is already submerged growth and it's dying off, we have a nitrate problem. Almost assuredly. That we don't have enough nitrate, and we could, in theory, be a little light on some of our micros, but for the most part, we're not given enough fertilizer. newbie in the plant world, and I thought those are good water column nitrate suckers. Yep, they are. For the most, I mean, the Anubius like doesn't is really really low demand. And the other thing is, if it's at the surface, if it's brown only at the top and the lower parts are green, you're actually like light burning it. You're giving it too much light. Most of those plants like lower amounts of light in general, especially the Anubias, but I've had the best success with water wisteria and a couple different species of water sprite by giving it lower amounts of light. So if I'm using something like a Fluval 3.0, I'm turning the power down for those plants. If I'm using a cheaper light like Beams Work or something like that, in general, I'm just trying to make sure that it's not getting barraged with light, because that can cause problems with some of those plants. When they get kind of that more, the medium area of light, that 40 kind of par, like kind of what I have been showing a lot lately in the par testing stuff, they do really, really well. And most likely you're not burning them. It's probably a nutrient issue. The biggest thing is making sure that we have kind of continuous nutrient sources. So that could come down to how we're dosing things. And that I would say, like, shoot me an email. Let's talk about how you're doing your fertilizers, and we can probably figure that out relatively quickly. Ethan, anyone got good all-in-one fertilizer suggestions? I'm in Canada, so I can't get Easy Green. Not true. You can get it through Amazon, but it's kind of expensive because there's all sorts of taxes and stuff. And Tropica is not available right now. Here's the thing. With the exception of the Flourish line, because it really wants some very specific things, you can use kind of any all-in-one. And you could look at something like the ADA stuff or something like that. I'm pretty confident, like, your stores like your Big Owls and stuff is going to carry stuff. Almost all the all-in-ones are the same in the grand scheme of things. There's very, very minute differences between them. So you don't need anything like, it doesn't have to be this specific brand is the only all-in-one to use. Bull. Just bull. But for the most part, they're all very, very similar. And one second, I'm going to get the name of that moss in chat because it was asked for. The Calicostella probactiana. There is its name and how it's spelled. If I remember right, like Boost Plant carries it and a couple other places. It's relatively easy to get. But what I would say is, don't worry so much about like the name brand that everybody uses, and more just find one that you can get reliably. And then follow its instructions really well. So if it's, you can see if you can get Brightwell. They have a pretty good line of fertilizer. I've used it quite a lot and like it. If you can get, I don't know if Thrive sells in Canada, but that's another option. The Tropica, ADA. I think UNS has a fertilizer. I don't know if it goes up to Canada, but I would guess it would, because UNS is a little more all over the place, in the sense of they're in more places. But yeah. I would look into something like that. Worry a little less about like the specific brand and more just like what can you get reliably, and then look at its dosing instructions and follow them really well. Now, woo, chat jump. That's how you know I'm really far behind. Aaron Davis, I am growing some Hygrophila pinnatophyta in my low to medium light non-CO2 community tank. It seems to be doing well, sending a bunch of runners. What is the max temperature that it will thrive at? I wouldn't push it too high personally. I've seen it do okay at 80, but in general, that plant tends to like 72 to 76 range. It can handle a little bit more, but you start stressing the plant when you do that. Geek Boy, reasonably caught up on email. I'm sorry, sir, none of the words you use make sense. That's somebody who's been around for a while. They know that I'm like perpetually behind on email. But actually, I'm reasonably caught up. There's like one, I think it's one or two. I'd have to look. But I need to go answer those bad boys so that I feel like I'm technically, for a very short period of time, caught up. Mike Stambaugh. I did find a lot of Asian watergrass for my outdoor tubs. Would you fertilize it? My other issue now is our Ohio temps are fluctuating so much my rainbow mops aren't hatching well. Yeah, if you're getting a lot of fluctuations, because they really do like to be warmer. It's just the season that they breed best in. The one thing I would look at doing is like try grabbing your mops out of your tubs and potentially getting them to hatch elsewhere. It's harder that way, right? Because you want them to be in the tub to get all the microorganisms and all the stuff that's in there, and that kind of natural breeding thing that those lucky Floridians can do anytime they want. But yeah, Asian watergrass is super good. I would say if you're not, depends on your fish load, you probably don't have to fertilize it too much, but you might put a little bit in. So like an example, you have a 120-gallon tub, you might once a week put like 3 pumps in of like an all-in-one fertilizer that's pump per 10 gallons, right? You don't need a ton. It's not as demanding as some of the other plants, but if you want it to like really cover super well and get those big, robust aerial root systems in the water, then you might want to add a little bit. All these moss questions. Don't you guys know I'm not like really great at moss? Jeez. Same person also gets to be some pilo moss. Do you have any tips for this moss? No, not in pilo moss. And that's just a matter of I personally haven't grown pilo moss yet. I'm not a big moss person. I prefer doing other plants over moss for the most part. And a lot of it's because the best way to do moss is with certain amounts of hardscape or like just coating your sponge filter with it. And that makes it really hard to service things. Like I had a sponge pre-filter on my running river tank, and I had to clean it out over the weekend. And I had literally the front 2/3 of it were completely latched on these big bundles of needle leaf java fern that had just rooted all the way in. I had to kind of slowly, carefully rip them out so that I could properly clean my sponge. And the big thing is with moss is like there are places where I want it. Like I have a bunch of java moss I'm growing currently, and I have that calicostata, but I have them for really specific purposes. I don't tend to use them in a lot of tanks. I try to avoid them in a lot of tanks because sometimes they can take over and just grow inside of everything, and it gets a little obnoxious. But if you're really good at controlling your moss, you can make it look extremely pretty. I'm just not that aquascaping minded. I just kind of like grow things because I enjoy them. And I let plants do their thing. Because I'm lazy, I suppose is a good way to go. Paul Sotero does an API have a fert line. Yeah, it's Leaf Zone, right? I'm sure it works fine. I've never personally used it, but it's an all-in-one. It's got to be pretty easy. Oh, Stephen P. I'm having a heck of a time with my pink flamingo. Yep. I thought it needed a lot of light, but I've lost all the leaves, tiny as they were, to BBA. Yeah, so here's the thing. Flamingo tends to do best with CO2 and strong light. And part of the CO2 is to help deal with algae, right? But it's such a finicky plant. And I've had success with it, and I've, like, epically failed with it. And, like, right now I don't have anything doing super well. I've got one plant that I'm hoping will come back, but it's been a little upset. It got shaded, and it got really angry at me. So I don't know if it will. Like, it's such a finicky plant that I've almost given up on trying to keep it because it just wants so much. And there's other crypts that are like super pretty that are nowhere near as finicky. But flamingo's like become that super gotta have it plant for a lot of people. So it's almost like you want to succeed so that you can help people also succeed with it. If that makes sense. It's tough. It's a tough little plant. Drives me crazy. It just drives me crazy. Have CO2 still not cooperating. Well, then, I mean, like, my last option is, like, what's your cleanup crew and what's your flow, right? Start balancing those things out to help deal with potential blackbeard algae. Son of a quack. Do you think val roots would be burned by dirt right after plucking it from sand? Or should I just float it for a little bit? If it already has a root structure and you're going to put it into dirt, it should be okay. Because the big thing is, if it's in sand, it's going to have a more struggle when it comes to creating roots. And when you get it into dirt, it should, in theory, be easier for it to create roots. And succeed, because it's a root-based plant, right? It's a rosette. I don't think it should be an issue. You could float it if you want, if there's like way different water parameters, but yeah. And yeah, Joe Davis said try floating one and planting the other and see what happens, right? You could float half and plant the half and see what happens. Okay. Live plants for brackish water. What does well? So this is where it gets really interesting, because you can look at, there's species of Vallisneria that are naturally come from like the like Tanganyika, that are designed to handle really high pH and really high mineral loads and can even go kind of salty. That's a good option. Mangrove, of course, is like the most common thing because it naturally comes from that kind of water, although that's not really like an aquatic plant. The big thing is finding plants that have wider pH ranges and can handle certain levels of salinity. The biggest problem is for most plants, that brackish level of salinity, as you start getting high, it's really hard for them to do well. You'll get plants that will like have their roots in the water, but they grow their foliage up out of the water because they're relying on atmospheric CO2 to boost their growth to actually survive. Not all of them. It's one of those things where not very often do you deal with plants in brackish water. You can do some of the macroalgae, actually will do in brackish water, and a lot of them look like plants because they naturally grow in higher salinity levels in the ocean, right? So that's where you can start looking at like what macroalgae will actually survive in brackish water that has a kind of planty look to it. That might actually be easier to accomplish than necessarily going the other direction of taking plants and getting them into brackish water. So I hope that helps, Terra Green. But yeah, I would say the most likely one is going to be the high pH val. You can find it, stuff that just, if you get people that live in like the Midwest and stuff, they're naturally dealing with that much harder water. Some of the epiphyte plants can also do that kind of stuff. Mostly some of the Anubias species or Bulbitis. Some of the stuff that comes from Africa that naturally deals with much harder water systems. But, you know, don't expect to take like a Rotala and make it work. Spider-Man, do you use an auto doser on any of your setups? Nope. I dose them by hand. So usually what I do is when I'm feeding in the morning, depending on what dosing schedules for each tank, I just walk around with my little bottle of, right now, Easy Green, because that's what I have, and just squirt a little bit in, throw some food in, next tank. Simple, easy, really doesn't take very much time. That's why I use liquid all-in-ones, because I'm trying to make stuff faster. I don't do any of my own personal mixing, no crazy nonsense like that. I just look at my tank and it's like, oh, that 40 breeder has a ton of plants and a little bit of CO2. I didn't give it any nutrients yesterday. I should probably give it a couple pumps today. Some get a little bit of fertilizer every day. Some get fertilizer every 3 days. It really depends on the tank. And some only get it like right after a water change, because they have like only Java Fern, which is super low demand. And yeah, I just have like this weird tracking system in my brain, and sometimes stuff gets missed. That's fine. Plants can handle that, right? It's when you like continuously miss things that it just goes. But if it's like, if you miss once and then like you're good for a month, the plants won't care. They'll be all right. Future Talent, how does temperature affect the growth of algae? You know, I'm not sure. It affects bacteria much more than anything else. and parasites, in the sense that a lot of parasites don't like high temperature, but bacteria does, because it just spawns so much faster, right? It replicates faster. But, I'm not terribly sure how that affects algae specifically. I would assume that some of the harder algae will have more success in higher temperatures, but some of the softer algae, like your hair algae and stuff, might not do as well. But that being said, I've seen plenty of discus tanks by like really good discus people that have green hair algae that they're cleaning out constantly, because most of their plants can't handle the 86-degree temperature they keep it at, but the algae can. So a lot of it might just be that you're more likely to see algae in those higher temperatures because the plants don't do as well at those very high temperatures, so algae doesn't have as much competition. And it might not be because of the algae does better in the temperature, but rather that the competition to the algae does worse, so the algae has a higher chance to thrive. But that's a completely unscientific opinion. I have nothing to back that up. It's just kind of a theory in my head based on some experience and talking to some friends. All right. We got Dr. Block coming up next. He should be starting very, very soon. I will get you a link to my good friend. Have a drink with the gentleman. My Aussie buddy has his weekly live stream. Number 87 is coming up. Jeez. That guy's busy. 87 of them? It's more consistent than me. So we'll do like one more question, and then I'm going to call it a night, because I would like to go have dinner. Tatiana Sacco. Hi, Bentley. I just can't make my Monte Carlo grow despite my fertilization, CO2, ADA substrate system. The others are growing just fine. Any suggestion? So I would ask a couple questions. The first one is, do we know how much calcium is in your water? Monte Carlo loves calcium. So if you're in some naturally softer water and you're doing lean dosing, so you don't have a lot of calcium lying around to buffer in any way, shape, or form, that can actually make Monte Carlo really struggle. 2, how well is it rooted in? Because if it's rooted in pretty well and it's just not growing from there, that's where we're seeing our problem. And 3 would be like, I assume you have pretty good light given the fact that you're using CO2 and an ADA system, but how much light are we putting on them? Those smaller fine plants like that do like a little bit more light. They like that higher light. It really helps them, especially because they're very low to the substrate surface, so they're naturally dealing with lower light levels via diffraction in the water to begin with. And it's kind of a careful balancing game. But one of the big things I found, most people who struggle with Monte Carlo, myself included, it's because Monte Carlo actually really likes a lot of extra calcium, and we don't have that much calcium in our water system when we're growing like tons of, more demanding or prolific plants, right? The Monte Carlo might not be as prolific an absorber of nutrients, and it's getting outcompeted by the other plants in the tank. There's a couple different other options, but basically we get down, we can look at like what our overall nitrate levels are, and some of our micros and macros, like the exact dosing of our fertilization, to understand like, well, is that really cool Rotala in there actually sucking up like so much that the Monte Carlo is just getting enough to stay alive but not thrive. Right, these are little things we could look at. Usually requires a lot of like testing and going back and forth with some data to kind of dig in and figure out what the key root of the problem is. But my first guess would be, are we adding some extra calcium, like crushed coral or something like that? Because those plants really do love calcium. And then second, we start looking at like how we're fertilizing, what kind of nutrients, or what's competing with that stuff, to get an idea of, is it just it's getting kind of starved out by the other plants because the other plants are thriving and it's not. There's a lot of questions we can ask, and with the right amount of data, we can solve the problem. It's just tough. Tough. All right. Well, thanks for the super chat, Future Talent. We'll answer that real fast, and then I'm bouncing out of here. Last question: do you need high flow if using high CO2 and high light? In general, it helps, but not necessarily. It depends on your plants. I have a betta tank and not seeing as much growth in my stems and valve that I want. Are you using CO2 currently? Like how long has this tank been established? what type of plants are we talking about? What's our fertilizer regime? Here's the thing. Like, this is definitely something that requires an email. Let me give you my email. Whoop! I gotta like not misspell my own name. bentley.pasco@gmail.com. Shoot me an email. What I want to know is like what fertilizer you're using, how much and how often you dose, what your light regime is, just like what light it is and how many hours it's on a day, or if you have like a program that you're running, let me know what that is. How much CO2 are you pushing into the tank? What's the size of the tank? And then what are the plants that are in there with this thing? How long has it been around? All that kind of stuff. Because there's a lot of variables that we're talking about here. It's very hard to just be like, I've got a tank with CO2 and light. Why the heck aren't my plants growing? Well, if they've only been in there for a week, they're still converting. They're still, that's why I say there's a lot of variables, and if we can get all those answers, it's a lot easier to like dig in and actually start adjusting and fixing the problem and figuring out what the problem is in the first place. So shoot me an email. I'll get back to you hopefully tomorrow. Okay? Just because I got a few things I got to take care of tonight, but after that, I don't have a lot of email in my queue right now, and you gave me a super chat, so I'll take care of you. Shoot me an email. Give me those kind of details. We'll go back and forth. We'll start working on that and trying to figure it out for you. All right, gang. That's going to be it. Thank you so much. We've had like a lot of people, a lot of chat. I like it. It's been really good for like super nice weather summer. So thank you guys, as always, so much for watching. And stay awesome.